At Thanksgiving dinner, my father sneered across the table, "You can't even afford a mobile home," while my mother served him a second helping of turkey. His words hung in the air as my brother Brandon smirked into his wine glass. Dad continued, gesturing with his fork. 33 years old, still renting some apartment in Seattle, doing what? Playing with computers? The extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one defended me. They never did. I took a slow sip of water, set down the glass precisely, and watched condensation pool around its base on my mother's expensive tablecloth. My phone vibrated for the 7th time in my blazer pocket. I ignored it. The notifications could wait. They'd been waiting for months anyway. "I manage," I said simply, cutting into my dry turkey breast. My mother had never learned to cook it properly, always leaving it in too long because Dad liked his well done. "Managing isn't thriving," my father declared, warming to his topic the way he always did when he had an audience. "Your brother here just closed a major deal at Redstone. Saved the company $500,000 in operating costs." Brandon straightened in his chair, preening like a peacock. At 35, he still lived for Dad's approval. Still worked at the same manufacturing company where our father had spent 3 decades climbing to VP of operations. That's real achievement, Maya. Not whatever it is you do with that tech support job. I smiled. Actually smiled. Because tech support was precisely what they believed I did. Some nebulous IT help desk position that barely paid my bills. I'd let them believe it for years. Let them assume the worst every time I dodged questions about my work. "Technology changes fast," I said mildly. "Nothing's ever really stable in my field." "Exactly," Dad pounced, as if I'd proven his point. "Brandon has security, benefits, a pension plan. Redstone Manufacturing has been solid for 60 years. Meanwhile, you're working for some startup that could disappear tomorrow, probably making $30,000 a year if you're lucky." He shook his head with exaggerated pity. "I told you to study accounting, practical, stable. But no, you had to chase this computer nonsense." My Aunt Carol, Dad's sister, cleared her throat awkwardly. "Richard, maybe—" "I'm just being honest," he interrupted, raising his hands. "Someone needs to give her a reality check. She's 33, Carol. Still single, no assets, no real career. At her age, I already owned this house." He gestured around the 4-bedroom colonial in Bellevue that he never let anyone forget he'd bought in 1993. My phone vibrated again. 3 sharp pulses. The pattern I recognized. My assistant Sarah marking something urgent. Probably the timeline moving up. I reached for my wine, noticed my hand was perfectly steady, and felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Brandon was watching me with that familiar mix of pity and superiority. "It's not too late, Maya," he offered magnanimously. "I could talk to Dad. Maybe get you an interview in our admin department. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work." "That's thoughtful," I replied, my voice honey-sweet. "How is Redstone doing, actually? I read something about manufacturing sector struggles." Dad waved dismissively. "Media nonsense. Redstone's rock solid. We've weathered every storm for decades. Not like these tech bubbles that pop every few years." He pointed his fork at me. "That's the difference between real business and whatever fantasy world you're living in." I nodded slowly, setting down my wine. "Fantasy," I repeated softly. My phone vibrated again. This time, I pulled it out, glanced at the screen. The message from Sarah was brief. "Deal closing ahead of schedule. Board meeting moved to Monday. Press release draft attached. Congratulations, boss." I looked up at my father, at his smug certainty, at Brandon's pitying expression, at my mother's silent complicity in this yearly ritual of humiliation. 15 years. 15 years since I'd walked out of this house at 18 with nothing but a scholarship to Stanford and a promise to myself that I'd never need their approval again. "Dad," I said quietly, sliding my phone back into my pocket, "would you excuse me? I need to make a call. Work thing." He snorted. "See? Can't even enjoy Thanksgiving without some tech emergency. That's no way to live, Maya." I stood, smoothed my blazer, and smiled again. "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "It's no way to live at all." As I walked toward the hallway, I heard Brandon mutter, "Probably getting fired," followed by my father's bark of laughter. In the bathroom, I finally opened Sarah's attachment. The press release was perfect. The numbers were staggering. And the timing, announcing on Monday just 3 days after Thanksgiving, was absolutely poetic. I looked at my reflection in my mother's medicine cabinet mirror. Same face I'd had at 18 when I'd left this house swearing I'd never be small again. Same dark eyes, same stubborn jaw, but different. So different. Monday morning, The whole world would know exactly who Maya Parker was, and my father's rock-solid Redstone Manufacturing would have a new owner. The irony was almost too perfect. I returned to the table composed, ignoring the knowing looks exchanged between my father and brother. The meal continued with its familiar rhythm, Dad holding court about Redstone's quarterly performance, Brandon interjecting with carefully rehearsed anecdotes about his contributions, my mother refilling glasses and collecting plates with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd perfected the role decades ago. The automotive sector contracts are locked in through 2027, Dad announced to Uncle Jim, who nodded with appropriate admiration. We're the primary supplier for 3 major manufacturers. That's stability. That's what real business looks like. His eyes flicked to me. Not chasing the next shiny app or whatever Silicon Valley is peddling this week, I focused on my pumpkin pie, each bite mechanical. My cousin Jessica, Brandon's wife, leaned over. Don't let him get to you, she whispered. You know how he is. Her sympathy was genuine but useless. Jessica didn't understand that I'd stopped letting him get to me years ago. This wasn't pain I was feeling. It was patience. After dessert, while the women cleared dishes, a tradition my mother enforced with silent expectation, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Aunt Carol. She dried while I loaded the dishwasher, and she finally said what had been hovering unspoken. Your father means well, Maya. He just worries. He has an interesting way of showing it. I arranged plates with precise efficiency, same pattern as always. Stack by size, glasses on top rack, silverware sorted. He thinks money equals success, Carol continued, lowering her voice. It's how he was raised. My father was the same way. If you couldn't show it, you hadn't earned it. I paused, holding a wine glass up to the light, checking for lipstick stains. And what do you think success looks like, Aunt Carol? She was quiet for a long moment. I think it looks like someone who left a difficult situation and built something on their own terms. But I'm not the one you need to prove anything to, sweetie. She touched my shoulder gently, though I wish you'd bring someone around sometime. Let us see what your life actually looks like. The mystery just feeds Richard's imagination. The mystery was intentional, but I couldn't explain that. Instead, I smiled and said, maybe next year. From the living room, I heard Dad's voice rise in laughter, followed by Brandon's. They were watching football now, the traditional post-dinner ritual. I dried my hands and checked my phone again. 3 more messages from Sarah, 2 from my CFO, Robert, 1 from my head of legal, Patricia. The machine was in motion, and Monday would detonate like a carefully placed explosive. I stayed another hour because leaving too early would trigger questions. I endured my father's parting shot. Drive safe in whatever used car you're running these days. Without mentioning that my Range Rover was parked 3 blocks away. I'd driven the 2015 Honda Civic specifically because it matched their expectations. Let them think I was struggling. Let them believe their narrative. The drive back to downtown Seattle took 30 minutes in light traffic. I passed through Bellevue's manicured suburbs into the city's vertical steel and glass, each mile marking a transition between 2 completely different worlds. My penthouse occupied the top floor of a building in Pike Place. $15 million of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. The doorman greeted me by name. Evening, Ms. Parker. And I rode the private elevator up, still wearing the mask of the daughter who couldn't afford a mobile home. Inside, I kicked off the sensible flats I'd worn for their benefit and poured myself a real glass of wine, a 2015 Bordeaux that cost more than my father made in a month. The city sprawled below me, lights reflecting off the water, ferries crossing the sound like slow-moving stars. My phone finally got my full attention. Sarah's messages outlined the accelerated timeline. The board had voted unanimously Thursday morning to move forward with the Redstone acquisition announcement. Legal had finished due diligence. Finance had secured the funding structure. PR had the statement ready. We were announcing Monday at market open, ahead of schedule, because Redstone's third-quarter numbers were worse than projected, and our window of optimal valuation was narrowing. Robert's message was characteristically blunt. Redstone's bleeding worse than they disclosed. Their automotive contracts are shaky. 2 manufacturers are switching suppliers next fiscal year. If we don't close now, we'll be buying a corpse in 6 months. Board wants your final approval by Sunday night. Patricia's legal memo was attached, 47 pages detailing every aspect of the acquisition. I'd read it twice already, but I opened it again, scanning for any detail I might have missed. The structure was clean. Nextech Solutions would acquire 100% of Redstone Manufacturing for $340 million, primarily stock with $85 million cash. Current Redstone leadership would remain through a 90-day transition, then face organizational restructuring based on operational efficiency analysis. That clinical phrase, organizational restructuring, meant my father and brother would be evaluated by my team. Their positions, their salaries, their entire professional existence would be subject to metrics and performance reviews conducted by people who reported directly to me. The poetry of it was exquisite. I opened my laptop and pulled up Redstone's employee directory, something I'd had access to for weeks, but hadn't examined closely. Richard Sullivan, VP of Operations, tenure, 31 years, current salary, $185,000 plus performance bonus. Brandon Sullivan, Senior Manager, Supply Chain Optimization, tenure, 8 years, salary, $94,000 plus bonus, both in the operations division, both positioned exactly where the inefficiencies were concentrated. My phone rang. Sarah calling instead of texting, which meant urgency. "I know it's Thanksgiving," she started. "I'm working anyway. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. The opposite. Redstone's CEO called me directly. He's panicking about their Q4 projections. He wants to meet tomorrow, Friday. He's willing to accept our final offer without the renegotiation he was pushing for last week. We can close this by Wednesday if we move fast." I stood, walked to the window, watched the city breathe below me. Wednesday, 5 days from now. What changed? Their biggest automotive client just sent notice they're reviewing alternative suppliers. Redstone's board is spooked. They want the deal done before more dominoes fall. Sarah paused. "Maya, this is exactly what we wanted. They're desperate enough to take our terms, which means you'll have complete control over the restructuring. No negotiated protections for existing management. Complete control over my father's fate, over Brandon's career, over the company they'd told me represented real business, while my work was dismissed as tech support fantasy." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. "Schedule the meeting," I said. "Saturday morning, our offices. I want Robert and Patricia there. And Sarah, make sure we have a complete personnel file on every executive and senior manager. I want performance reviews, salary history, everything, including the Sullivans, especially the Sullivans." After we hung up, I stood there for a long time, holding my wine, watching Seattle's lights blur and sharpen. In 72 hours, I would sit across from Redstone's CEO and sign papers that would make me his boss. In 5 days, my father would report to work at a company I owned. And he still wouldn't know. The temptation to call him right now, to shatter his smug certainty immediately, was almost physical. But that would be impulsive, messy, emotional. I'd spent 15 years building something he couldn't diminish, couldn't dismiss, couldn't wave away with his condescending lectures about real business. I'd done it quietly, deliberately, letting him think exactly what he wanted to think. Monday morning, when the press release went out, when CNBC reported that Nextech Solutions had acquired Redstone Manufacturing, when Bloomberg detailed my net worth and Forbes updated their lists, that's when he'd understand, not when I told him in anger, when the entire world told him in facts he couldn't dispute. I finished my wine and opened my laptop. There was work to do. An empire didn't run itself, and I had a family dinner to digest in more ways than one. Saturday morning arrived cold and sharp, Seattle's November rain streaking the conference room windows at Nextech's headquarters. I'd chosen the top floor deliberately, the same floor where 12 years ago I'd worked through the night writing code that would become our flagship cloud infrastructure platform. The same floor where I'd taken meetings with our first investors, convincing venture capitalists that a 21-year-old Stanford dropout knew what she was doing. Now that floor housed a conference room that seated 30, walls lined with monitors displaying real-time data from the 43 enterprise clients we served globally. And sitting across from me, looking diminished in the space, was Martin Hendricks, Redstone Manufacturing's CEO for the past 6 years. "Ms. Parker," he began, shuffling papers nervously. "I want to thank you for meeting on a holiday weekend. Time is money, Mr. Hendricks." I kept my voice neutral, professional. Beside me, Robert had his laptop open, Patricia had 3 color-coded binders, and Sarah was taking notes on her tablet. Across from us, Hendricks had brought his CFO and head of operations, a nervous man named Tom Brewster who kept adjusting his glasses. The meeting took 90 minutes. Hendricks walked through Redstone's current situation with increasing desperation. The automotive contracts that were shakier than they'd disclosed, the outdated manufacturing equipment that needed replacement, the pension obligations that were becoming unsustainable. Every revelation made our initial offer look more generous. "Our final terms are unchanged," Patricia said, sliding the contract across the table. $340 million, structured as outlined. Nextech assumes all liabilities and obligations. Current C-suite remains through 90-day transition period, then subject to performance review and organizational restructuring. Hendricks scanned the document, and I watched something die behind his eyes. The last vestige of negotiating power. The board wants guarantees about employee retention. We're acquiring a manufacturing company to diversify our hardware production capabilities, I explained, which was true but incomplete. We need Redstone's workforce. However, we will conduct efficiency analyses across all departments. Redundancies will be eliminated. Underperformance will be addressed. This is standard in any acquisition. Your operations division, Robert interjected, pulling up a spreadsheet on the monitor, shows significant cost overlap in middle and senior management. 6 VPs, 14 senior managers, all in supply chain and operations. Industry standard for a company Redstone's size is 3 VPs, maybe 8 senior managers. That's where we'll see the most restructuring impact. I watched Tom Brewster pale. He was operations. Those were his people. Our team is experienced, he protested weakly. 30, 40 years of institutional knowledge in some cases. Institutional knowledge is valuable, I agreed, when it translates to efficiency. When it doesn't, it's just expensive nostalgia. I let that sink in, then softened my tone slightly. Mr. Hendricks, Redstone needs this acquisition. Your Q4 numbers are going to be disastrous. 2 more quarters like this, and you're facing bankruptcy, not buyout. We're offering you a future. The terms are fair. Take them. He took them. Signed right there, hands shaking slightly, initialing every page while his CFO witnessed. Patricia collected the documents with clinical efficiency, and just like that, Redstone Manufacturing belonged to Nextech Solutions. Belonged to me. We'll announce Monday morning, I said as we stood. Market open, simultaneous press release. Your board will receive detailed integration plans by Tuesday. The transition team arrives Wednesday. After they left, Robert closed his laptop with a satisfied click. That was almost too easy. Desperation makes people flexible. I stayed at the window, watching Hendricks and his team hurry to their car through the rain. Sarah, I want the personnel files on my desk by tomorrow afternoon. All of them. But flag the operations division specifically. Looking for anyone in particular? She asked, though her tone suggested she knew. Just want to understand what we're working with. That evening, alone in my penthouse, I spread Redstone's organizational charts across my dining table. The company employed 847 people across 3 facilities, Tacoma, Phoenix, and a smaller operation in Ohio. The Tacoma plant, the flagship facility, employed 412. And there, in the operations division, were the names I was looking for. Richard Sullivan's file was thick. 31 years of employment, starting as a floor supervisor in 1993, climbing steadily through shift manager, operations manager, director, and finally VP of operations in 2015. His performance reviews were consistent. Meets expectations, reliable, maintains status quo, nothing exceptional, nothing innovative, just steady, unremarkable competence in an industry that was slowly dying. His salary progression told a story too. He'd peaked at $192,000 3 years ago, then received only cost of living adjustments since. The raises had stopped when the company started struggling, but nobody had told him the ship was sinking. Or maybe they had, and he'd been too arrogant to listen. Brandon's file was thinner but more damning. 8 years at Redstone, all of it in supply chain under Dad's division. His performance reviews showed a pattern: strong scores in teamwork and company loyalty, mediocre scores in innovation and initiative. The classic profile of someone promoted because of who they knew, not what they delivered. His last review from 6 months ago included a note from his supervisor. Brandon works well within established systems, but struggles when asked to develop new approaches. Recommend keeping in current role rather than advancing to director level. In other words, he'd hit his ceiling. He was never making director, never mind VP. His career had plateaued at 35 because he lacked the vision and drive to go higher. And he sat at Thanksgiving dinner pitying me. I poured myself a whiskey, Macallan 25, the bottle I saved for significant moments, and let myself feel it fully. Not anger, not vindictiveness. Something colder and more precise. Justice, maybe. Or just the natural consequence of their own limitations catching up with them. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Carol. Hope you got home safely yesterday. Thinking about what you said. You're stronger than they give you credit for. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, "Thank you. I think you'll see exactly how strong very soon." Sunday, I spent 12 hours at the office with my leadership team, finalizing every detail of Monday's announcement. The press release was crafted to maximize impact. Nextech Solutions, valued at $12 billion, acquiring legacy manufacturing company in strategic diversification move. My name would be everywhere. My face, the professional headshot I'd finally agreed to after the IPO, would be in every business publication. "Your father is going to see this," Sarah said quietly, late Sunday night when it was just the two of us reviewing final edits. "I'm counting on it." "And you're ready for that conversation?" I looked up from my laptop. Sarah had been with me for 7 years, since she was a junior assistant and I was a CEO of a company valued at $200 million instead of $12 billion. She'd seen me navigate hostile board members, aggressive competitors, and gender discrimination that would have destroyed someone with less resolve. She knew me better than almost anyone. "There won't be a conversation," I said. "There will be a fact. He can react however he wants, but the fact won't change. I own his company. I control his career, and he's going to have to reconcile that with every dismissive word he's ever said to me." She nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think he's going to regret underestimating you. He already does. He just doesn't know it yet." Monday morning, I dressed with deliberate care. Tom Ford suit, charcoal gray, Louboutin heels that added 3 inches, hair pulled back severely, diamond studs, small, tasteful, expensive. I looked exactly like what I was, a billionaire CEO about to reshape an industry. The press release went live at 6:30 a.m. Pacific, timed for market open in New York. By 6:45, my phone was exploding. CNBC wanted an interview. Bloomberg was running a feature. Forbes was updating my profile. The Wall Street Journal was calling it one of the most significant cross-sector acquisitions of the quarter. And in Bellevue, my father was waking up to a world that had fundamentally changed while he slept. I pictured him in his kitchen, drinking coffee, maybe glancing at his phone, seeing the news alert, reading it once, reading it again, the confusion, the disbelief, the dawning, horrifying realization. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Bellevue. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Maya Sullivan speaking. Maya, my father's voice, strangled and tight. "What the hell is this? What? They're saying Nextech bought Redstone. They're saying you're the CEO? Yes, I am." Silence. Long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then, "This is a mistake. Some kind of, you can't be serious. You..." "Me," I confirmed, my voice pleasant and professional. Nextech Solutions acquired Redstone Manufacturing for $340 million. The deal closed Saturday. We're announcing the integration plan tomorrow. You'll receive an email from our transition team by end of business today. "You're lying. This is some kind of joke. Turn on CNBC, Dad. Check the Wall Street Journal. Call your CEO if you don't believe me. Though technically, I'm your CEO now. You work for me." Another silence. This one shattered by a sound I'd never heard from him before. Something between a gasp and a choke. "We'll talk about this later," I said calmly. "I have 8 media interviews scheduled this morning. But Dad, you should probably start updating your resume. The restructuring begins in 90 days, and I'm told the operations division has significant redundancies. Have a good day." I hung up while he was still trying to form words. The media blitz consumed Monday and Tuesday. I gave interviews that would air on every major business network, answered questions about Nextech's diversification strategy, deflected inquiries about my personal life with practiced ease. The narrative that emerged was exactly what I'd orchestrated. Visionary tech CEO making bold move into manufacturing, bridging the gap between Silicon Valley innovation and traditional American industry. Nobody asked about my family. Nobody connected Maya Parker of Nextech Solutions with Richard Sullivan of Redstone Manufacturing. Why would they? Different last names, different industries, different worlds. Wednesday morning, our transition team descended on Redstone's Tacoma facility. I didn't go personally. That would have been too obvious, too theatrical. Instead, I sent Marcus Webb, our VP of Operations Integration, a man with 30 years of manufacturing experience and absolutely zero tolerance for inefficiency. I watched the proceedings via video conference from my Seattle office. The meeting room at Redstone was crowded. Martin Hendricks sat at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged 5 years and 5 days. Tom Brewster was beside him, pale and sweating, and there, 3 seats down, was my father. I'd seen him angry before. I'd seen him disappointed, frustrated, dismissive, but I'd never seen him look small. His suit was the same one he'd worn to Thanksgiving, I realized. The good Navy one he saved for important occasions. He sat rigidly, hands clasped on the table, and he wouldn't meet the camera. Marcus began with efficiency statistics, comparing Redstone's operational costs to industry standards. Every slide made the company look worse. Overhead too high, production per employee too low, waste percentages in the double digits. Nextech's preliminary analysis, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of unavoidable conclusion, indicates that current operations division staffing is approximately 40% above optimal efficiency. 40%. I watched the number hit the room like a physical blow. 40% redundancy meant eliminating at least 2 of the 6 VPs and nearly half the senior managers. It meant my father's department was going to be gutted. We'll be conducting individual performance reviews over the next 60 days, Marcus continued. Every manager, senior manager, director, and VP will undergo assessment. We'll evaluate productivity metrics, cost management, innovation contributions, and strategic value. The bottom 20% will be offered severance packages. The middle 60% will face restructured roles with adjusted compensation. The top 20% will be invited to continue with Nextech's Integrated Operations Division. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see it through the video feed. Beside him, Tom Brewster was taking notes with shaking hands. And at the far end of the table, I spotted Brandon, his expression cycling through disbelief, panic, and something close to nausea. The presentation lasted 90 minutes. By the end, the room had the atmosphere of a funeral. Marcus fielded questions with clinical precision. Yes, pension obligations would be honored. No, tenure alone wouldn't protect anyone. Yes, relocation might be required for some positions. No, there would be no negotiating the timeline. When it ended, I watched my father stand slowly, gather his papers, and walk out without speaking to anyone. The camera angle caught him in the hallway, pulling out his phone, staring at it like he didn't know what to do. Then he made a call. My phone rang 30 seconds later. I didn't answer. Let him leave a message. Let him stew in the uncertainty, the powerlessness, the dawning understanding that his entire career was now subject to someone else's evaluation, someone he'd dismissed as a tech support failure. Thursday, my mother called. I was in a board meeting and sent it to voicemail. She called again an hour later. And again. By the 5th call, I excused myself and answered. Maya, please tell me what your father is saying isn't true. Her voice was high and tight, the tone she used when company was coming and the house wasn't clean. Crisis management mode. Which part, Mom? Don't be flippant. He says you own his company now. He says you're going to fire him. He says you've been lying to us for years about what you do. Maya, what's going on? I walked to my office window, watched the midday rain blur the city below. I'm the CEO of Nextech Solutions. I have been for 12 years. We acquired Redstone on Saturday. All of that is true. And yes, there will be restructuring at Redstone, including in Dad's division. I'm not lying about any of it. But you let us think. She trailed off, struggling to process. You let us believe you were struggling, that you needed help, that you were barely getting by. No, Mom, I let you believe what you wanted to believe. I never said I was struggling. You assumed it. Dad assumed it. You both built this entire narrative about my failure without ever asking what I actually did or how I was actually doing. You wanted me to be small, so you saw me as small. That's not fair, isn't it? I cut her off, and there was an edge in my voice I couldn't quite suppress. I came to Thanksgiving dinner and Dad humiliated me in front of the entire family. He said I couldn't afford a mobile home. He offered to get me a job in an admin department at a company I now own, Mom. And you said nothing. You served turkey and said nothing. Silence on the line. Then quietly, he's terrified, Maya. He thinks he's going to lose everything. He won't lose everything. He'll lose the job he's been coasting in for 3 decades if he can't prove he deserves it. That's how the world works for the rest of us. Why should it be different for him? Because he's your father. The words hung between us, loaded with all the weight of obligation and expectation and family dynamics that had shaped my entire childhood. Because he's your father. Therefore, what? Therefore, I owed him protection from his own mediocrity? Therefore, I should sabotage my own company's efficiency to shield him from accountability. I'm the CEO of a $12 billion company, Mom. I have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders, our clients, our employees. I can't make business decisions based on family sentiment, and honestly, after the way he's treated me for 15 years, I'm not sure I want to. You're really going to do this? She sounded broken. You're really going to destroy your own father? I'm going to run my company competently. If Dad proves he's valuable to Redstone's operations, he'll keep his position. If he doesn't, he won't. It's that simple. It's not simple, Maya. It's cruel. I wanted to ask her if it was cruel when Dad mocked my career every Thanksgiving. If it was cruel when he told me I'd never amount to anything. If it was cruel when he dismissed every achievement I'd ever mentioned because it didn't fit his narrow definition of success. But I was tired, suddenly exhausted by the weight of her selective empathy. I have to go, Mom. Board meeting. Maya, please. I hung up, stood there for a long moment, feeling the familiar ache of wanting a family I'd never had. Then I straightened my shoulders, checked my reflection in the window's glass, and went back to work. Friday afternoon, I finally listened to my father's voicemail. There were 7 of them. Progression from confusion to anger to something approaching panic. The last one, left Thursday night, was different. Maya. His voice was rough, barely controlled. I need to talk to you. Not about work, about everything. Please, just call me back. I saved it but didn't respond. Saturday, I spent the day at the office reviewing the preliminary performance assessments Marcus's team had compiled. They were thorough, brutally objective, exactly what I'd asked for. And they confirmed what I'd already suspected. Richard Sullivan's evaluation was damning in its mediocrity. 31 years at the company, but minimal tangible contributions. No major process improvements, no cost savings initiatives, no innovations in supply chain or operations strategy. He'd maintained existing systems competently but never pushed beyond them. His team respected him, but more out of familiarity than genuine leadership. The assessment's conclusion was clinical. Mr. Sullivan represents institutional knowledge but limited strategic value in a modernized operational structure. Recommend transition to senior advisory role with reduced compensation or voluntary severance package. Brandon's was worse. 8 years. All of them under his father's protective wing. Every promotion he'd received had come with notes about potential and development opportunity, rather than actual performance. His current role could be absorbed by a competent senior manager. It didn't require his position to exist. Recommendation: eliminate position during restructuring. Offer standard severance. I closed the files and sat in the silence of my office. Outside, Seattle glittered in the twilight, unaware and uncaring about the small human dramas playing out in its towers. I could protect them. One word from me and Marcus would adjust the assessments, find justifications to keep them on. I was the CEO. I had that power. But I'd built Nextech on principles. Merit over connections, innovation over tenure, results over relationships. Abandoning those principles now would undermine everything I'd created. And for what? For people who'd never believed in me, who'd mocked and dismissed and diminished me at every opportunity. The phone on my desk rang. Internal line: Sarah, your father is downstairs, she said carefully. Building security called. He's asking to see you. I looked at the clock. 7:47 p.m. on a Saturday. He'd driven here from Bellevue, probably built up his courage for hours, maybe days. I could send him away. I could make him wait until Monday, force him to go through official channels, submit a meeting request to my assistant like any other employee. Send him up, I said. The elevator opened directly into Nextech's executive floor, a security feature I'd insisted on during the building's design. My father stepped out, and I watched him take in the space through the glass walls of my office. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the custom furniture, the monitors displaying real-time data from operations across 4 continents. He looked diminished here, his navy suit rumpled, his shoulders curved inward. I didn't stand, didn't rush to greet him. I stayed seated at my desk, my posture relaxed, but my eyes sharp. Maya, he stopped just inside the doorway, as if afraid to come closer without permission. This was new. He'd never asked permission for anything in my presence. Dad, have a seat. He sat, perching on the edge of the chair like he might need to bolt. His hands gripped his knees, and I noticed for the first time how old they looked. Age spots, prominent veins, the slight tremor of exhaustion or nerves. I didn't know, he said finally. I didn't know any of this. How could I not know? You never asked. I kept my voice level, professional. You never asked what Nextech was or what I did there. You assumed, and I let you assume. But why? The word came out plaintive, confused. Why let me think? Why humiliate me like this? I leaned back in my chair, studied him the way I'd studied hundreds of business adversaries across conference tables. Do you remember what you said to me when I told you I wanted to study computer science? I was 16. We were at dinner. Italian place on Main Street. You told me I wasn't smart enough for a real STEM field, that I should focus on something practical like accounting or nursing. He flinched. I was trying to protect you. You told me tech was a boys' club and I'd never break in. You said I was being naive about how the world works. I paused. Let him hear his own words reflected back. Do you remember what you said when I got the Stanford acceptance? Maya, You said it was a waste? That I'd drop out or fail out? That state school would be more my speed. You fought me on accepting the scholarship. Your own daughter getting into one of the best universities in the world. And you thought it was a mistake. His face was ashen now. I was worried about the pressure. You were worried I'd embarrass you. I said it flatly, a statement of fact. When I did drop out after 2 years to start Nextech, you told everyone I'd failed. Couldn't hack it. Typical Maya, never finishing anything. You used me as a cautionary tale at family dinners. Don't let your kids chase pipe dreams. I didn't know you were building something. You never told me. You never wanted to know. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, and I took a breath. Regained control. Every time I came home, you talked over me. Dismissed me. Made sure everyone knew I was the disappointment while Brandon was the success. You did that at Thanksgiving again, in front of everyone, and you enjoyed it. I saw you enjoy it. He opened his mouth, closed it. No defense came. I let you believe I was failing. I continued, my voice quiet now. Because your opinion of me stopped mattering a long time ago. I didn't need your approval or your validation. I built Nextech despite you, not because of you. And yes, when the opportunity came to acquire Redstone, when I saw your name in their employee directory, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing the truth would eventually come out this way. You did this on purpose. His voice was hollow. You bought the company to get revenge. No. I shook my head. I bought the company because it was a sound business decision. Redstone fits perfectly into our diversification strategy. The acquisition makes financial sense regardless of who works there. But did I take pleasure in the irony? Yes. Did I schedule the announcement the Monday after Thanksgiving specifically so you'd hear about it with the rest of the world? Absolutely. He sat with that, shoulders sagging under the weight of it. The performance reviews, Marcus Webb and his team, they're going to recommend I be fired. They're going to recommend whatever the data supports. I haven't seen the final assessments yet. This was a lie, but a strategic one. Let him think there was still uncertainty. Still hope. But you could protect me, if you wanted to. You're the CEO. You could tell them to keep me on. I could, I agreed. I could also tell them to promote you, give you a raise, make you untouchable. I have that power. Hope flickered in his eyes, desperate and pathetic. But I won't, I finished. Because I didn't build a $12 billion company by making decisions based on nepotism or sentiment. I built it by hiring the best people, cutting the dead weight, and running operations with ruthless efficiency. If you're valuable to Redstone, the numbers will show it. If you're not, they'll show that too. Maya, please. He leaned forward, hands clasped like he was praying. I'm 58 years old. If I lose this job, who's going to hire me? I've been at Redstone my entire career. I have a mortgage, your mother's car loan, Brandon's old student loans we helped with. You have savings, Dad. You've had a 6-figure salary for years. His silence was answer enough. No savings. Or not enough. The same man who lectured me about financial responsibility had squandered 3 decades of solid income on a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. Brandon, he tried desperately. What about Brandon? He's your brother, Maya. He's got Jessica, the baby on the way. Brandon is 27% less productive than the average senior manager in his role, I recited from memory. He costs Redstone $94,000 a year and delivers roughly $60,000 in value. He's in that position because you put him there, and he stayed there because you protected him. The assessment recommends eliminating the position entirely. You're going to fire your own brother. He said it like an accusation, like I was committing some unforgivable sin. I'm going to run my company efficiently. If that means streamlining redundant positions, then yes. Brandon can find another job. He's 35, not 18. He'll survive. My father stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. I don't know you anymore. I don't know who you've become. You never knew me, Dad. That's the problem. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, didn't turn around. Your mother is going to be devastated. Mom will be fine. She's more resilient than you give her credit for. I paused, then added, though you might want to think about downsizing. That house in Bellevue is expensive to maintain on a reduced income, or no income. He turned then, and the look on his face was pure anguish. How can you be so cold, so cruel? We're your family. You were cruel first, I said simply. You just didn't realize it because your cruelty was wrapped in concern and advice and what you thought was love. But it wasn't love, Dad. It was control. It was ego. It was your need to feel superior by making me feel small. And I'm done being small. After he left, I sat in the silence of my office and waited to feel something. Guilt, maybe. Regret. Some shadow of doubt about whether I'd gone too far, been too harsh, crossed some line that couldn't be uncrossed. Nothing came. Just a clean, cold satisfaction and the certain knowledge that I'd done exactly what needed to be done. Monday morning, Marcus's final assessments landed on my desk. I read them twice, verified every conclusion, checked every data point. Then I signed off on all of them. Richard Sullivan, transition to part-time advisory consultant, 60% salary reduction, 6-month contract with option to renew based on value delivered. Brandon Sullivan, position eliminated, standard severance package, 3 months salary and benefits continuation. 42 other positions across Redstone, eliminated, restructured, or consolidated. A complete operational overhaul that would save Nextech $18 million annually, while improving productivity by 23%. Tuesday, the notifications went out. By Wednesday afternoon, my father had cleared out his office. 31 years condensed into 2 banker's boxes. Brandon was gone by Thursday, updating his LinkedIn to exploring new opportunities. Friday, I took a meeting with Martin Hendricks, who decided to stay on through the transition period. I have to ask, he said toward the end of our discussion about Q1 integration goals, did you know they were your family when you made the acquisition? Yes. And it didn't factor into your decision? Not in the way you're thinking. Redstone was the right acquisition regardless of who worked there. But did I take a certain professional satisfaction in demonstrating competence to people who'd spent years telling me I had none? Yes. I'm human, Martin. I'm just not sentimental. He nodded slowly. Your father called me yesterday, asked if I could intervene, put in a good word for him. I told him I don't have that authority anymore. You do. What did he say? He said you'd changed. That success had made you heartless. Hendricks paused. I told him that in my experience, successful people don't become heartless. They just stop accepting other people's hearts as currency. I smiled at that. That's well put. For what it's worth, Miss Parker, you're the best thing that's happened to Redstone in a decade. The company was dying under the old guard. Your father included. They were good men in their way, but they'd stopped adapting, stopped innovating. They were letting the company sink rather than admit they didn't know how to save it. After he left, I pulled up the security footage from my father's final day at Redstone, watched him pack his boxes, shake hands with people he'd worked with for decades, walk out to his car in the rain. He sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before starting the engine, head bowed, shoulders shaking. I watched it twice. Felt nothing but the distant clinical observation of a natural consequence reaching its inevitable conclusion. Some people called it revenge. I called it accountability. 6 months later, I stood at the window of my penthouse, watching 4th of July fireworks explode over Elliott Bay. The reflection in the glass showed a woman in casual clothes, jeans, a silk blouse, bare feet, so different from the power suits and boardrooms that consumed most of my days. Redstone's integration was complete. The company was profitable again, lean and efficient, producing components for Nextech's new hardware division. The Tacoma facility had been modernized, the workforce retrained, the deadweight eliminated. Wall Street loved it. Our stock had jumped 17% since the acquisition announcement. My father was still on the payroll, technically. His advisory contract had been renewed once at 40% of his original salary for projects that kept him busy but far from any real decision-making power. He showed up 3 days a week, worked quietly, went home. I'd heard through Aunt Carol that he and my mother had sold the Bellevue house. moved to a modest condo in Renton. Brandon had found work at a smaller manufacturing company in Oregon, taken a pay cut, relocated with Jessica and their newborn daughter. I hadn't spoken to any of them since that night in my office. They didn't call, and neither did I. The silence was mutual, comfortable in its finality. Maya? Sarah's voice from behind me. I'd invited her and a few other executives over for a small celebration. 6 months of successful integration, a milestone worth marking. Robert wants to know if you're planning to announce the Phase 2 expansion tonight or wait for the board meeting next week. Next week, I decided. Tonight is just for us. No business talk. She smiled, nodded, retreated back to where conversation and laughter drifted from the living room. I stayed at the window for another moment, watching the fireworks paint the sky in brilliant, temporary colors. The truth was, I'd expected to feel more. Triumph, maybe. Vindication. Some sense of having won a war I'd been fighting since I was 16 years old. Instead, there was just this calm, quiet certainty that I'd made the right choices, built the right life, refused to be diminished by people who couldn't see beyond their own limitations. My phone buzzed. A text from Aunt Carol. Saw the Q2 earnings report. Your grandmother would be so proud. I'm proud. Happy 4th, sweetheart. I smiled, typed back. Thank you. That means more than you know. Another message came through. This one from an unknown number. I almost deleted it. Then curiosity won out. Maya, this is your father. I know we haven't talked. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I finally read an article about Nextech, about what you've built. I understand now why you made the choices you made. I'm sorry I never saw it before. I'm sorry for a lot of things. You don't have to respond. I just needed to say it. I read it 3 times. Looked for the trap, the angle, the ulterior motive. Found nothing but what appeared to be genuine regret from a man who'd finally, belatedly, understood what he'd lost. The old Maya, the one who'd craved his approval desperately enough to hurt, might have responded, might have accepted the apology, tried to rebuild some fractured version of a relationship. But that Maya was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned that some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, some relationships aren't worth salvaging, and forgiveness isn't always the highest virtue. I deleted the message without responding. At dinner, surrounded by the people I'd chosen, Sarah, Robert, Patricia, Marcus, and a dozen others who'd helped build Nextech into what it was, I raised my glass for a toast. 6 months ago, I began, we took a significant risk acquiring a struggling manufacturing company in an industry none of us knew. Tonight, that company is profitable, integrated, and positioned for growth. You all made that happen. Not sentiment, not nepotism, not keeping people on because of who they knew or how long they'd been around. We made hard choices based on data and principle, and we proved that those choices work. To hard choices, Robert echoed, raising his glass. To hard choices, everyone repeated. Later, after the guests had left and I was alone with the mess of a successful party, I found myself back at the window. The fireworks had ended, leaving the city in its normal shimmer of lights. Somewhere out there, my father was in his condo in Renton, maybe watching the same sky, maybe thinking about the daughter who'd outgrown his ability to diminish her. I didn't hate him. Hate required too much energy, too much emotional investment. I simply didn't need him anymore. Not his approval, not his validation, not his belated apologies or understanding. I'd built something extraordinary without him, despite him, and that truth was more satisfying than any revenge could ever be. My phone buzzed one last time. Another unknown number, but this message was different. Ms. Parker, this is Margaret Sullivan, Brandon's wife, Jessica's mother. I know this is presumptuous, but Jessica just had the baby, a girl. They named her Maya. I thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long time. Brandon, who'd sat at Thanksgiving and pitied me, had named his daughter after the sister he'd dismissed. An olive branch, a gesture of respect, or just a name they happened to like? This time I responded, congratulations to them. I wish the baby health and happiness. Polite, distant, final. I set down my phone and returned to cleaning up, methodical and efficient, the same way I approached everything. There were contracts to review tomorrow, meetings to prepare for, a company to run. The past was settled. The future was mine to shape. And if my father spent the rest of his life regretting his inability to see his daughter clearly, well, that was simply the natural consequence of his own choices. Some people called it cold. I called it clarity. The difference I'd learned mattered very much indeed.